your fighter.
The Magic set Battlebond takes place primarily in the Stadium of Valor's Reach, where combatants from across the world of Kylum gather to engage in public combat, often in teams of 2 for the audiences of Cloudspire City. The sport is called martial magic and involves wizards, warriors, and fantastic creatures fighting in the ring. Kylum itself is described as a peaceful plane, and martial magic is won or lost based on a point system rather than by killing your opponent. Penalty mages police the game, count the score, and keep things safe. But as Alison Lors wrote in her article, The World of Battlebond, this doesn't mean the athletes compete without risk. In martial magic, combatants fight for social status, and a loss can hurt your public reputation. The English author and essayist George Orwell wrote that sports are like war minus the shooting. And while international games like the Olympics might want to adopt this message as a sign of their utopian mission, what Orwell was suggesting is that, like war, athletics merits close criticism for the way that it can mask its inherent violence under layers of spectacle, and martial magic is no exception. One of Battlebond's primary influences are the gladiatorial games of ancient Rome, where an underclass of slaves and prisoners of war killed one another for the entertainment of the Republic's citizenry. And although contemporary sports might not always be as explicitly violent, the demands we place on athletes still take a tremendous toll on their bodies. For example, League of Denial tracks the cover-up of research into the lasting brain damage that NFL players experience and the dangerous impact this has on the athlete's post-football social and psychological health. And I know, we didn't get into Magic the Gathering to talk about football. But as our game moves into the realm of esports, I think it's worth considering what new pressures this will put on our competitors. You might have gotten a taste of it already if you've tried that arena climb to Mythic.
And so we just gotta get in there and draft for the next... until our bodies fail, our eyelids become heavy, and we pass out in puddles of our own fluids.
Beneath the more obvious Roman Colosseum aesthetic, Battlebond has a sub-theme operating just under the surface.
So the set, I want to say...
The flavor?
Yeah, the flavor of the set is Gavin sort of had this idea, or I don't know if it was only Gavin, but the idea is kind of an ode
Well, I know that Mel contributed to it as well.
Yeah, Mel was involved, and Sean Main, I think, was
Yeah.
involved too. So I don't know who came up with the idea to build the theme of the set, but it's kind of around esports and like arena battling in esports, kind of.
There's
So
a special plane where it's all about battling, and
It's like Gladiator Arena,
Yeah.
right?
But before we talk about esports, I think we need to discuss the philosophy behind how games are made. And to do this, I want to bring Kotaku's news editor, Jason Schreier, into our conversation. His book, Blood, Sweat, and Pixels, is the most in-depth look I've come across on the sometimes troubling labor practices of this industry. Schreier's investigation into the development process behind 2016's blockbuster title Uncharted 4 is particularly illuminating. He entered the scene just as lead creative director Amy Hennig was leaving the project, to be replaced by Neil Druckmann and Bruce Straley. And these top-level changes brought with them a full rewrite of the game's story. There was intense pressure on the team to get things right, because the game was intended to be the final title for series protagonist Nathan Drake. As Schreier writes, if you look closely at any scene in Uncharted 4, you'll spot something extraordinary. The creases on Drake's shirt, the stitches on his buttons, the way he pulls the leather strap over his head when he equips a rifle, these details didn't pop out of the ether. They emerged from a studio full of people obsessive enough to add them to the game, even if it meant staying at the office until 3 a.m. This led to working conditions which in the game-making industry is called crunch, which is a form of extended, grueling overtime. And since many of the developers had come over from Naughty Dog's previous games, they went from crunching on The Last of Us to crunching on Uncharted 4. Some were working over 14 hours a day for months. Straley described the mental state in this way. How do you muster the courage and the will to keep going? Because nobody else is. Everybody on the team, it felt like, was running on fumes. And I'll remind you, that's one of the directors of the game speaking. So if anything, he's incentivized to make the conditions sound better than they actually were. And yet he talks like he's coming out of a goddamn Ingmar Bergman movie. The reason I bring up all this, though, is because I think the term crunch can be useful for unpacking the demands we place on esports athletes. Wizards recently hosted the Mythic Invitational, a $1 million tournament that garnered the most concurrent viewers the game has ever achieved on Twitch. And beyond the invites offered to the 30 members of the Magic Pro League and 26 prominent community members, 8 slots were reserved for players that qualified through the Arena ladder system. And like many ladder systems, what the Arena ranking model rewards most is time invested in the game. So these 8 competitors essentially engaged in a form of mini crunch, where the best way to secure a spot was to play non-stop in the days leading up to the end of the qualifying season. And you might object to this comparison because, unlike the developers on Uncharted 4, these players are not employees of Wizards of the Coast. But I think that since Wizards is actively selling the dream of being the best player in the world,
and when you leave the stage and the lights, you won't have to tell anyone because they will already know. When you walk into a room, you will see it in their eyes, hear their whispers, feel their respect, understand their fear.
they are complicit in and responsible for the path to that position. And if you want to argue that these players just love the game and will do anything to compete, I think that's true and commendable, but it's not the whole story. Schreier noted something as he observed the Uncharted staff. There was always a cascading effect, he writes. When one designer stayed late to finish a level, others would feel pressure to stay late too. Besides, what self-respecting artist wouldn't want to milk every hour to make his or her work as good as possible? You know, passion can often stitch us to systems that operate against our own best interests, whether that be our physical or mental health. And I don't think I'm alone in recognizing that just because you love something doesn't mean it treats you well. Crunch is usually caused, as we saw with Naughty Dog, by changes to top-level priorities, and the impact of these changes tend to cascade down and affect workers who are asked to make up the labor difference. As we push our game into the world of esports, that cascade is hitting aspiring and semi-pro players hardest, and it's changing how the game is played in paper too.
This is honestly like probably the worst PT or Mythic Championship, whatever, that you could play in as your first one, because it is so weird and so different. You know, before you could like, you know, study and read articles and figure out things, and now it's just like, yeah, you're just kind of screwed, because everyone else with like these big testing teams are going to be able to like figure out these things and how they matter, and now this is just not even like a Magic tournament.
That's Jerry Thompson speaking about the most recent changes to organized play, which include the new London Mulligan and public deck lists at the upcoming Mythic Championship. He correctly identifies that heavily enfranchised players like his fellow Magic Pro League members will be able to adapt to the many changes that have occurred over the past months. But the pressures they put on newer challengers seem almost insurmountable. Jerry has been a consistent advocate for the better treatment of competitive players, even going so far as to sit out on the 2018 World Championships in protest. I think many of the changes being enacted are necessary moves to improve the spectator experience of the game, but I think we also need to expand the project that Jerry has begun. In particular, I'd like to see a competitive players association that is not affiliated with Wizards, which could present a public voice for the interests that are often forgotten as these changes are implemented. And I know this may have felt like a grim or overly negative video, so I'd like to close with one of my favorite moments from recent competitive play, which I think can kind of serve as an emblem of the changes I'd like to see enacted. It's the semifinals of the very first Mythic Championship, and nobody understands the exact pressure and stress you're under better than the opponent sitting across the table from you. And that's when he pulls out a small plastic bag.
Just one of the many benefits besides the money and the points.
But that's what people are mostly playing for, to spend time with us.
I always assumed so. Look, wait, is he giving him food?
That's real sportsmanship right there.
Oh, that is great. Ikawa feeding Luis.
Token off.
Beyond the big jackpots and the flashy displays, what's going to take our game to the next level is a competitive environment in which players can truly flourish. And to achieve that, I think we'll need to support one another right up until the match begins. Then, it's a bloodbath. I haven't done my groveling in a few videos, so I'll just say if you appreciated this one, please leave a like and consider subscribing. I also have a little bit of news. I'll be taking part in the War of the Spark preview event So I'll be streaming with the new cards on April 23rd, starting about 10 a.m. Eastern time. I'm not much of a streamer, but if you're interested in checking out the new cards and would want to chat about any of the videos that I put out on this channel, feel free to stop by. I have to teach a class in the afternoon, but otherwise I'm basically running through the whole day. Anyways, if you've stayed this long into the video, thank you so much. I appreciate you spending your time with me, and I'll see you in the next one.